It's April 10th, 2026. 4 humans are floating inside a capsule the size of 2 minivans hurtling toward Earth at 25,000 miles per hour. They've just done something no living person has ever done. They went to the moon. Not to land, not to walk on it, but close enough to see craters the naked eye has never seen. Close enough to watch meteors strike the lunar surface in real time. Close enough that Earth, the entire Earth, every person they had ever loved, every city they had ever visited, every war ever fought, and every song ever written, fit behind a window the size of a carry-on bag. Most people watching the live stream assumed the hardest part was the rocket, the heat shield, the physics. But psychologists who study what happens to the human brain in deep space will tell you something different. The hardest part isn't getting there, it's coming back. And almost nobody is talking about what that actually means. Let's start with the obvious theory because it sounds right. You go to space, you float around, you see some stars, you come home grateful, maybe a little disoriented for a few days, then life goes back to normal. That's the assumption. But here's the problem with that story. It doesn't match what astronauts actually report. It doesn't match the neuroscience of what happens when the human brain is exposed to a perspective it was never built to process. And it doesn't match what the Artemis II crew said in the hours and days after splashdown, when they were still raw, still trying to find words for something that language wasn't designed to hold. Commander Reed Wiseman turned to pilot Victor Glover during the lunar flyby, as the sun disappeared behind the moon, and the darkness became total and absolute, and said, "I don't think humanity has evolved to the point of being able to comprehend what we are looking at right now." That's not a poetic exaggeration from a man trying to sound profound at a press conference. That's a real-time report from a trained military aviator and NASA commander, someone selected precisely because they remain calm and analytical under pressure, telling his crewmate that what he was experiencing exceeded the capacity of his own cognition to process. That sentence should stop you. Because if someone specifically trained to handle the extraordinary is saying the human mind isn't equipped for this, what exactly is happening up there? Psychologists have a name for it. The overview effect, a term coined by writer Frank White in 1987 after interviewing dozens of astronauts, describes the sudden, overwhelming cognitive and emotional shift that occurs when a human being sees Earth from space for the first time. Not a photograph of Earth, not a simulation, the actual planet, hanging in actual darkness with no frame around it, no edge, no ground beneath your feet, nothing between you and the void except a few inches of spacecraft. Christina Koch, who had already experienced it from the International Space Station, said that even from that distance, she realized that every person she knew was sustained by a single thin band of atmosphere visible from space. That you don't see borders from up there. You don't see religions or political systems or the things humans spend most of their energy fighting over. You see one object, breathing, alone. But Artemis II took that experience somewhere it hadn't been in 53 years. These 4 astronauts weren't in low Earth orbit 200 miles up. They were 250,000 miles away. At their farthest point, they broke Apollo 13's record, reaching 252,756 miles from home. From that distance, Earth isn't just small, it becomes a concept. Jeremy Hansen, the Canadian astronaut experiencing his first spaceflight, described being on the far side of the moon, the side no human eye sees from Earth, and feeling as if the capsule had dissolved. "You weren't in a spacecraft," he said. "You'd been transported." For 40 minutes on the far side, they lost all contact with Earth. No signal, no voice from mission control. Just the 4 of them, the moon, and the universe. When contact was re-established, Koch's first words were, "It is so great to hear from Earth again." Not Houston, Earth. Now here's what the neuroscience says about what was actually happening in their brains during those moments. Psychologist Paul Piff at the University of California, Irvine studies awe. Specifically, the kind of awe that occurs when a person encounters something so vast, so complex, that it temporarily exceeds their mental frameworks for understanding the world. In those moments, something measurable happens. The default mode network, the part of the brain responsible for self-referential thinking, for the narrative of me and my problems and my plans, goes quiet. Stress hormones drop. Time perception distorts. And crucially, something researchers call the small self effect kicks in, a sudden and profound sense that you are smaller than you thought, that the boundaries between yourself and everything around you are less fixed than they seemed. This isn't mysticism, it's reproducible in laboratory conditions. And what the Artemis II crew experienced while looking at Earth from lunar distance is, according to every psychological framework we have, the most extreme version of that state a human being can enter. Not metaphorically, literally. No human-made drug, no meditation retreat, no near-death experience produces documented brain states that match what happens when a person sees their entire planet hanging in the void from 250,000 miles away. And then they came back. Wiseman said, while still on the recovery ship, barely hours after splashdown, his voice breaking, "Victor, Christina, and Jeremy, we are bonded forever, and no one down here is ever going to know what the four of us just went through." Coke joked that in the first days back, every time she woke up, she thought she was floating and had to convince herself she wasn't. Their bodies, after just 10 days, were already confused about which way was down. Their nervous systems were relearning gravity, and somewhere behind the press conferences and the hugs and the hero's welcome at Ellington Field in Houston, four human beings were quietly beginning the strangest reintegration any person can face. Returning to normal life after seeing that there is no such thing as normal from far enough away. Astronauts who have gone through it describe a period researchers call re-entry shock, and they don't mean the atmospheric kind. They mean the psychological collision between the perspective you carry back from space and the world that kept going while you were gone. Traffic, grocery stores, disagreements about things that, from 252,000 miles, were geometrically invisible. The Apollo astronauts were given almost no psychological support for this transition, and several of them fell apart in the years that followed. Buzz Aldrin struggled with depression and alcoholism. Edgar Mitchell founded an institute dedicated to studying consciousness because nothing in conventional science gave him a framework for what he'd seen. Michael Collins wrote that he believed world leaders should be required to see Earth from orbit before making any decision affecting humanity, because the cognitive shift is that fundamental and that irreversible. The Artemis II crew will be fine. NASA has learned. There are psychologists, transition protocols, careful reintegration programs. But something more interesting than their adjustment is happening right now in the broader culture. For the first time since 1972, a generation of people watched humans go to the moon in real time, watched them describe what they saw as the lighting changed, and the moon filled the window, and Earth shrank behind them, felt, for a few days, something that psychologists are calling moon joy, a collective shift in emotional register, a brief, contagious reminder that the species is capable of extraordinary things when it stops arguing long enough to point in the same direction. The psychology of someone who just returned from the moon isn't really about space. It's about what happens when a mind built for one scale is briefly forced to operate at another. And what it tells us, every time it happens, is the same thing it told the Apollo astronauts, and the same thing Reed Wiseman couldn't quite say in words on the deck of the USS John P. Murtha. That the distance we traveled to get to the moon is nothing compared to the distance between how we see the world before we go and how we see it after. And that distance, once crossed, cannot be uncrossed. Welcome home, integrity.